Jesus showed me that the Hebrew letters in the Torah aren't just ink on parchment, they are a living, breathing pulse of divine data. He opened a scroll made of golden fire and showed me that every single character is a coordinate in a multi-dimensional map of time. He touched the ancient text, and I saw the letters flickering like a high-tech display, revealing that the final shaking of our modern world is already mathematically locked into a book written thousands of years ago. It is not a collection of stories, it is divine software. He proved that the Creator signed his name in a code so complex that no human mind or supercomputer could have ever faked it. For 60 years, I stood at my podium at NYU and told my students that God was just a psychological crutch for the weak. My name is Harold Bernstein. I am 90 years old, and I lived as a militant atheist, worshiping only logic and secular humanism. But 2 years ago, during a bypass surgery, the cold silence I preached about finally claimed me. My heart stopped for 5 agonizing minutes. I watched from the ceiling as surgeons panicked, hitting my open chest with paddles, while I was pulled into a vacuum of light that felt heavier than gravity. I did not find nothingness. I found the architect of the universe, and he reduced my career to dust. What I am about to reveal will challenge everything you think you know about reality. I saw things that still keep me awake, specifically a code involving the Nuremberg trials in 1946 that defies every law of probability. If you feel the world is spiraling out of control, you must see the blueprint Jesus showed me because the clock is running out. Before I reveal the Holocaust code that shattered my skepticism, I want to ask, do you believe history is an accident, or do you feel a design behind the chaos? Share your heart in the comments below. Please subscribe and hit the notification bell now, because this message was given to me specifically for you. For 4 decades, my life was contained within the mahogany-paneled lecture halls of NYU, where I taught my students that the universe was a mathematical accident without a soul. I was Harold Bernstein, a man who viewed the Hebrew Torah not as a divine revelation, but as a fascinating artifact of primitive sociology. I remember standing at the podium, mocking the idea of a creator, while pointing to equations of entropy and chaos as the only ultimate truths. To me, logic was the only God, and anything that couldn't be measured in a lab was a dangerous delusion. My skepticism wasn't just a career, it was my armor. By the time I reached 88, I was a hollow monument to secular humanism, fully prepared to face the cold nothingness I had spent a lifetime defending. The end didn't come with a philosophical epiphany. It came with the sterile, metallic taste of fear during a scheduled quadruple bypass surgery. I remember the suffocating weight of the anesthesia mask and the last frantic conversation between the surgeons about my plummeting blood pressure. Then the world fractured. My chest felt like it was being crushed by an invisible mountain, and the rhythmic thump in my ears suddenly dissolved into a high-pitched, agonizing whistle that seemed to vibrate through my very bones. I felt my consciousness begin to fray at the edges, like old parchment catching fire. The coldness of the operating table vanished, replaced by a terrifying sensation of slipping out of my own skin as if I were a hand being pulled from a tight glove. I didn't simply stop existing, I rose. I found myself hovering near the flickering fluorescent lights of the ceiling, looking down at a grisly scene that should have horrified me but felt strangely distant. Below, my own body lay split open, a silent lump of graying flesh surrounded by panicked men in blue scrubs. I watched a nurse's trembling hands as she checked the monitor that displayed a flat, unwavering green line. The surgeon screamed for the paddles, his forehead slick with sweat as he fought to jumpstart a heart that had given up. Later, the medical reports would confirm I was clinically dead for exactly 5 minutes. But in that moment of detachment, time had already begun to lose its linear meaning. The walls of the operating room started to turn translucent, and the desperate shouts of the medical team faded into a heavy rhythmic vibration. A force more powerful than gravity took hold of my essence, pulling me through the roof and into a vertical vacuum that smelled of ozone and ancient dust. The hospital, the city, and the very planet I called home shrank into a tiny, insignificant point of light beneath me. I was being hauled toward a destination that defied every law of physics I had ever taught my students. The nothingness I expected was being replaced by a presence so dense it felt like a physical weight against my soul, leading me directly toward the architect I had spent 90 years denying. The vertical vacuum that swallowed me didn't feel like empty space. It felt like being pulled through a liquid membrane made of pure white heat. I expected the transition to be cold or silent, but the light had a physical weight and a temperature that felt like a warm summer afternoon against my skin. Every ache in my 90-year-old joints simply evaporated, replaced by a clarity I hadn't felt since I was a boy. I wasn't just moving through space, I was being filtered. The surgical room and the smell of ozone vanished, replaced by a library of stars where the air itself seemed to hum with an ancient rhythmic intelligence. He was standing there, waiting in the center of that radiant silence. He wasn't the pale blue-eyed figure from the Renaissance paintings I'd mocked in my lectures. This was a man of the Judean desert. His skin was the color of burnished bronze. His hair was dark and thick like sheep's wool, and his eyes held a fire that felt like it could see every secret I'd ever hidden. I tried to stand, to find some academic dignity, but my knees buckled. I found myself sobbing, great racking gasps of air that I didn't even need, overwhelmed by a love so heavy it felt like it was physically crushing my chest. He reached down and touched my shoulder, and the heat from his hand was the most real thing I have ever experienced. "Harold," he said, and hearing my name in his voice made my entire career as an atheist feel like a tragic, laughable mistake. He told me he had brought me here not to judge me, but to show me the blueprint of everything that has ever happened. He pulled a scroll of golden vibrating fire from the light and told me that the world was about to change. He promised to show me why the letters I had studied as mere literature were actually the mathematical heartbeat of the universe itself. Jesus touched the glowing letters of Genesis on that scroll of fire, and suddenly the static text I had analyzed for decades began to breathe. He didn't just explain the Torah, he pulled me into the geometry of the first page. I saw the Hebrew letter Tav, and then, like a pulse of golden electricity, the light skipped exactly 50 characters to land on Vav. It skipped another 50 to Resh, and another 50 to He. Right there, woven into the very beginning of creation, the word Torah was spelled out in a perfect mathematical interval that no human editor could have possibly manufactured or hidden from the eyes of men. My academic brain tried to calculate the odds, but the sheer scale of the precision silenced my internal monologue. I looked at Jesus, my eyes stinging with tears of pure shock, and whispered that this had to be a coincidence. He looked at me with a soft, knowing smile and said, "Harold, a man can write a story to entertain his neighbors, but only the architect can weave the signature of the law into the very atoms of the alphabet." He was referencing the truth that the word is settled in heaven before it ever touches a human pen. I realized then that my skepticism was just a form of intellectual pride that had blinded me. He moved his hand across the scroll to the book of Exodus, and the same impossible pattern repeated itself with terrifying accuracy. Again, at the exact interval of 50 letters, the name of the law appeared like a watermark beneath the surface of the narrative. But then he showed me something that made my heart stop, or it would have, if I were still in my body. In the books of Numbers and Deuteronomy, the code reversed itself. pointing back toward the center of the Torah. It was as if the entire 5 books were a giant symmetrical arrow pointing toward a single hidden point of convergence that I had been completely blind to before that day. I realized in that moment that I wasn't looking at a religious relic, I was looking at a divine software program that held the fabric of reality together. Jesus showed me that the Hebrew letters are actually coordinates in a multi-dimensional map of time where every jot and tittle serves as a digital lock. He explained that when people ignore these patterns, they are trying to navigate a complex ocean without looking at the compass provided by the captain. "The numbers do not lie, Harold," he told me, "because they are the language of my Father's thoughts, structured to withstand the entropy of your world." It was a terrifyingly logical revelation for an atheist like me. This wasn't just a clever linguistic trick or a bit of ancient wordplay. It was a total dismantling of my secular worldview. I had spent 60 years calling this book a collection of desert myths, yet here was a mathematical complexity that outpaced any supercomputer in New York. I felt a weight of responsibility beginning to settle on my soul, a desperate need to share this truth with every student I had ever misled. But as profound as these structural patterns were, they were only the foundation. What Jesus did next when he turned the scroll to the book of Esther was what truly made me fall to my knees in absolute shock as the codes shifted toward modern history. Jesus moved the scroll to the book of Esther, and the atmosphere shifted to a heavy historical gravity. He focused on the list of Haman's 10 sons, revealing something that defied every law of probability I'd ever taught. 3 letters were written smaller than the others, and one was significantly larger. Jesus explained that in the Hebrew calendar, these anomalies pointed directly to the year 1946. Suddenly, I witnessed the Nuremberg trials. I saw 10 Nazi war criminals on the gallows, and one, Julius Streicher, screamed, "Purim Fest 1946," as the trapdoor opened. The date, the number of men, and the year were locked in a text written 2 millennia before it actually happened. I stood there, my academic arrogance pulverized by the sight of history being dictated by an ancient scroll. I asked him how a human hand could have hidden such a precise timestamp without a computer. Jesus placed his hand on the glowing text and said, "Harold, the nations of your world think they are playing a complex game of chess, but I am the one who built the board and designed the pieces." He explained that the Torah is a living digital signature of the sovereign. Every jot and tittle I once mocked was actually a firewall protecting the truth from time. It wasn't just a book. It was the architect's source code for the entire human experience. The visions accelerated into a kaleidoscope of numbers, focusing on the restoration of Israel. Jesus showed me the Dead Sea of data within the book of Ezekiel, pointing to the years of punishment mentioned in chapter 4, verse 6. He showed me how, when you multiply those biblical years by the cycles of the sun and moon, you arrive at the exact date of May 14, 1948. It was the precise moment the dry bones of my people were breathed back to life as a sovereign nation. Jesus whispered that the rebirth of Israel was the great alarm clock for humanity, a mathematical certainty hidden in plain sight. He proved that the fulfillment of prophecy is as inevitable as the sun. But then the scroll began to pulse with a dark, intense frequency that made me drop to my knees in terror. Jesus showed me a map of our modern world where the letters of the Torah began to flicker violently over the Middle East. He revealed a code concerning the final shaking, a period of global upheaval that is already mathematically locked into the text. I saw the names of modern leaders and the coordinates of events yet to happen, all woven into the same fabric that predicted the Holocaust. I begged him to stop, to close the scroll, because the weight of knowing the end was so near felt like it would tear my soul apart. Every human plan became meaningless. I stayed on the ground weeping not for my own sins, but for the blindness of a world that thinks it is drifting aimlessly through space. Jesus knelt beside me, his presence like a wall of warm, protective fire, and spoke with a tenderness that broke my hardened heart. He said, "Harold, do not fear the numbers, for they only prove that my Father has never lost control of a single second." He told me the codes were not meant to cause panic, but to serve as a final invitation to the architect's house before the door is shut. I realized that my 60 years of atheism were not just wrong, but a tragic waste of the divine data provided. Jesus slowly rolled the scroll back into the light, and the vibrating fire of the Hebrew letters faded into a soft golden hum. He looked at me with a final definitive authority and said, "The math is finished, Harold, and now you must go back to tell them that the book is a living prophecy, not a dead history." He told me that the time of the great unveiling was at hand, and that my mission was to ensure this message reached the hearts already beginning to feel the shaking. I felt the celestial library dissolve into a blinding white flash, and the heavy pull of my broken physical body suddenly returned. I knew the 5 minutes were over. Jesus closed the scroll, and the light began to pull away, leaving a hollow ache in my spirit. He looked at me with a definitive authority and said, "Harold, you were a teacher of lies for 60 years. Now go back and be a witness to the truth." I felt a sudden sharp terror because I did not want to leave that perfect peace to return to a dying world. I begged him to let me stay, but he simply placed his hand on my shoulder and whispered, "My grace is enough for the task I have given you." Then the library of stars imploded. I was slammed back into my physical body with a violence that knocked the breath out of my lungs. The warmth of his presence was replaced by the biting cold of the operating room and the metallic tang of blood in my throat. I heard a nurse gasp, "He's back. Professor Bernstein is breathing," as the agony of my chest returned with full crushing weight. I am telling you this because I cannot keep the architect's data buried in the silence of my own heart. For 6 decades, I misled my students by telling them the universe was a mathematical accident. But Jesus showed me the living code that proves the absolute opposite. The skips of 50 letters spelling the law, the hidden year of the Nuremberg trials in the Book of Esther, and the calculated rebirth of Israel in 1948 are not coincidences. They are the digital signatures of the Creator. I spent 2 years after my surgery learning ancient Hebrew just to verify every single jot and tittle on the physical parchment with my own eyes. It was a terrifying responsibility to come forward and risk my academic reputation, but the numbers left me no other choice. The clock is ticking toward the final shaking, and the blueprint I witnessed in the light is the only map that will survive the coming storm. If you're sitting there feeling like the world is spinning into a chaotic void, or if you've been told that faith is only for the weak-minded, I am here as a man of logic to tell you that you are being invited into the architect's house. Jesus didn't give me a religion. He gave me the source code of reality itself. To those of you who feel the weight of global uncertainty, remember that the numbers Jesus showed me prove that not a single second of history is outside his sovereign control. The restoration of Israel was the final alarm clock, and the math shows that the hour is very late. You don't need to be a university professor to see the design. You only need to recognize that the book you've ignored is the very software that sustains your life. The invitation is real, and the time to enter the covenant is right now. I was a militant atheist until the math left me no other choice, and now I pass this witness directly to you. Please subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the deeper codes I will reveal next. Give this video a like if you feel the architect calling you, and share it with one person who still thinks the Bible is just a myth. I want to know in the comments, do you see the design in your own life, Or do you still feel the world is an accident? Jesus showed me these numbers for a specific reason, and I believe that reason was to reach you today. The architect is returning, and his signature is written in every breath you take.